here's a monitor. Okay, I see the monitor. Ooh. That's not my... Ah, there we go. Okay. Okay, so this lecture is an introduction to the first chapter of Physics for Realists, PFR, as I'll call it. And as I said, your primary source in this class is the textbook. And so there's a lot of careful reading required outside of class of the textbook. And we'll use our classroom time to review what you read in the reading, as well as to work problems. There are really two different kinds of problems in the textbook, as you will see, both the very mathematical problems and the problems that don't involve math but involve an expression of understanding. So, the first question, then, presuming you have read the chapter, the text in the first chapter. And so I'm going to open this question for discussion in the class, and right now, because I'm recording without a class, I'm going to give my experience with this. The question is, what is physics? Natural question. But I think you would be surprised to find out how many people, even physicists, professional physicists, might have trouble answering this question. What is physics? Now, the natural answer to this question, which I hope that you are able to give, especially after reading the first chapter, or perhaps on your own, the natural answer to this question is rigorous study of the stuff around us, and in particular, the rigorous study of the physical world. Okay, the physical world. Well, that's a partial answer, but the problem is it doesn't really explain. It's not a complete answer because it involves the use of the word physical, which is a bit overlapping with the question, what is physics? So that really, a complete answer really must rely on an understanding of what is a physical thing. And now, in this case, very few physicists would be able to answer that question. That's one that will stump most of them. And the reason for this difficulty, you will come to understand in this course. And I'm going to delay explaining to you why it is that professional physicists have a difficulty with this. There's a good reason for why they have trouble with this. And in a conventional course, the other sections of 122, for example, the students will not learn the answer to these questions either. But in this class, because it emphasizes understanding, this is really the beginning of the class. We have to explain what is the subject of the course. So there's a specific answer given in the textbook, and were I lecturing with students who I presume to have read the text, I would be requiring them to answer these questions. They should have understood this by a careful reading of the text. Very simple. What is a physical thing? It is something and can be something else. That is a definition for physical. That's a very old definition. But it is a very good definition, a good understanding of what a physical thing is. Physical things are all around us. We know everything we know. We have learned through the physical world. And so physics in that sense is an extremely broad subject. Now let's see. I'm going to try to move things around here. Okay. So those two definitions you need to know well, and you'll come to a deeper understanding of all of this as we go through the course. But it brings up the immediate question about, because it's the rigorous study, it involves knowledge, human knowledge of the physical world. And the text addresses the question of how do we come to knowledge of the physical world. So, there are, in relation to that, two powers of the human mind. That are described in the text. And again, with a live classroom, I would be asking them, what are they? For the purpose of this recording, I will remind the reader that the text talks about the two powers of the human mind, the sensory powers and the intellectual powers. The senses are our five ordinary senses, including those, but also the ability of the mind to do some understanding on a sensory level of the knowledge that it gains of physical things. So you touch something, you see something, you taste something, you hear it. These are, of course, all senses. But also there is something acting within the human mind to organize and compare those senses. So we know that yellow is not the same thing as sour. And so there's some internal sense which is relating the five external senses. So it's not simply the five external senses, but it involves those external senses. But there are also some internal senses which are helping to understand the sense knowledge that is gained of the physical world. By sense knowledge, when we sense something, sense knowledge is always of particular things. I sense a particular dog. I sense a particular color of a particular thing. I sense particular people, particular clouds. Those are always individual, particular things that you sense, and there's no exception to that. The senses are always acting on particulars. You know particular things through your senses. You have sense knowledge of particulars. The intellect, by contrast, works on universals or generals, generality or universals. And this is where the human mind is especially different from the animal mind, the brute animal or mere animal, and the ability to understand universals. So not only do I sense particular dogs, but the mind is capable of understanding dog in general, the generality of dog. I sense particular colors, but the mind is capable of understanding the concept of color, generally speaking. So these generics exist only in the mind. It's as those generics. The intellect works on the sense knowledge that is received and extracts from that, abstracts. This is abstraction, which we will talk about some more. This is the first instance of abstraction that we encounter in this class. The mind has the ability to form abstractions of things that it senses. So color is a perfect example. Animal is a perfect example. I have the concept, you should all have the concept by living in this world and being human, of understanding the general concept, the generic animal. But you don't sense a generic animal. There's no generic animal that you've ever sensed. You've only sensed particular animals and in fact, particular species of animals. So those sorts of generics we are going to talk about some more. This process of abstraction is very important. It's a power of the human mind that's very important. And it's not something that's generally discussed in most physics classes. And yet it is absolutely critical in the process of doing physics, of learning about the physical world. Okay, so to emphasize this, let's see, I need to try to add a page here. No, we don't want to do that. Insert blank page, maybe. Okay, good. Okay, next question then has to do with this distinction between the sense and the intellect. And I guess I should go back to this at this point. So the intellect is capable of coming to knowledge of universals, but it does so through the particulars. So the abstract knowledge that the mind has of the world begins with particulars. And that's the way, in fact, you know everything. All that you know, ultimately, comes through the senses. Even the most abstract knowledge that you have ultimately relies first on the sense knowledge. So we have this understanding, these abstractions, these very broad concepts, and maybe very complicated concepts that come from combining things in the mind. But ultimately, all of those ideas, all of those concepts, can be traced back to ordinary sense experience of particular things in the world. As I said, we'll talk about this some more, and the significance of this for the study of physics. It's actually very important. But I'll, for the time being, emphasize the importance of this by giving a question. What do you know without prior use of your senses? And again, the thoughtful reader who has gone through the first chapter very carefully will know the answer to this. Nothing. You don't. Everything you know, you got through use of your senses. And there isn't anything that you know that wasn't gained without prior use of your senses. And this is a very important point. Now, in the preface, he describes the relationship. Oh, I misspelled that. Good. This practice my eraser technique. So, who can remember, please, in reading the preface, you should have noted the use of two words, idealism and realism, because the textbook is described as Physics for Realists, and he describes what realism is in the preface, and in particular, he also describes what idealism is. So the realist understands this connection to the senses, that the way we know the real world is through our senses, and our ideas come from those sense experiences and knowledge of the real particular world. And all of our knowledge comes that way. The idealist, by contrast, thinks incorrectly, that all we really know are our ideas, that what we know are ideas, and we really don't know the world around us, and that our focus and our mental activity is consumed with dealing with these individual with the ideas in the mind and not with the real things in the world. Okay. Hence the title of the book and the emphasis of the book right off in the first chapter and in the preface on the connection through our senses. So, for these reasons, because everything you know comes through the physical, that means then that physics is the base science, and in fact is the basis of all our knowledge, period. Not just knowledge of science, not just knowledge of the physical world, but knowledge, period. Physics is the base science. And here I use the word science, broadly speaking. Science comes from scientia in Latin, which means knowledge. So, because all of our knowledge comes through the physical, physics is the base knowing. All knowledge is founded on top of that. And for that reason, everyone should take physics. And I know that sounds a little bit funny, maybe self-serving, some people would say, that a physics professor is going to say that everybody should take physics. But it's very important to understand that. And it is not simply a matter of trying to get more people to take physics. And in fact, I would say probably understanding physics properly is very important in this. That is, everybody should take not the conventional equational physics course, but rather a course like this one that emphasizes understanding. So in that sense, everybody should take a correctly grounded physics course, like this one. Okay. Now, because it's the base science, everything that follows is dependent on it. So any errors in the physics will propagate forward. So it's very important that we get the physics correct. It's important for physics to be rigorous because everything else is dependent on an understanding of the physical world. So, let me give you an example of this with another question, by prompting you with another question. Oops. Learning how to use these eraser and stuff and the marker. And I can see that this lecture is going very differently than it would with a live class, because I would be in a live class, I would probably be doing a lot less writing and relying more on so I wouldn't be writing these questions down, relying more on the audio recording for this. But I'm using this as a practice also for learning how to use these markers and write on the podium. Okay, so the question is, what are you more certain of? The existence of atoms or the existence of yourself? Now, you think that that may be kind of a silly question. I propose to you an experiment which you can do easily. And it's especially true, it will be especially interesting if you try this on somebody who's got an advanced degree, lots and lots of years and experience in the technical sciences, an advanced degree in physics, biology, chemistry. If you ask a person who's had lots of years of training and experience in those areas, a lot of those people will have trouble with this question. Because the tendency will be to say, atoms somehow are more fundamental in a way than people, which is true in a way, in the sense that bodies are composed of parts. But nonetheless, your knowledge of atoms relies first on yourself. And you come to a knowledge of yourself even through the sensory. You come to a knowledge of the world around you through your sense experience of the world. That's how you learn about yourself, that you're even thinking about the world. In fact, your understanding of your understanding comes from you reflecting on the fact that you know the world around you. So the existence of atoms is only proven after you know about yourself. And in fact, your knowledge of yourself is more certain than the existence of atoms. So let me elaborate on this a little bit by asking some simple questions about the things around us, for example. Your knowledge of things around us in this room, for example, that's the most certain thing you know, is the stuff around you. That's your first experience of the world, the sense knowledge of the world. As I said, all of your knowledge comes through the senses, and the things that you experience around you, those are primary, and those are the things that you are most certain of. Things that are derived from that are less certain because they rely on those first steps. So how would you go about proving the existence of atoms, for example? You would have to build some mechanism, some experiment or something that relies on the use of your senses and on the understanding of your own existence in order to prove the existence of atoms. I'm ran out of time.